Today we're going to look at Matthew 24. One of the more difficult chapters in the Bible. Is this talking about the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, or is it talking about the end of the world? And my answer is yes. Basically, the judgment is finally going to come upon Jerusalem. You serpents, you brood of vipers, so that upon you may fall the guilt of all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who you murdered. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. Okay, so all these things did come upon them. The judgment came upon Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. Behold, your house, your temple, is being left to you desolate. And then Jesus left the temple, similar to Ezekiel 10, when the presence of God left the temple and went to the Mount of Olives. And the temple will be abolished, actually, is what this says. It will be destroyed, torn down. Now, as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign of your parousia, your coming, and of the end of the age?" So there's two questions. When will this happen, and what will be the sign? The sign is associated with two things, the parousia and the end of the age. I think it's possible the apostles thought that this would all be the same event. And I can tell that by the way Jesus answers the question. He makes it clear that these are two different events. So what I'm going to talk about is not preterism. You might call it partial preterism, but I hate to label things because I'm really just trying to do some exegesis here of what the passage actually says. You know, it's helpful to just try to forget everything you know about this passage, or you think you know, or that you've heard, because I'll show you real quick here that the things we hear in church or even online about Matthew 24 are kind of erroneous, I think. And this word parousia, it's used 4 times in this chapter. And it's the only time this word is used in all of the Gospels, all the 4 Gospels, to distinguish it from the other word that means coming. And I put the parousia in green so that we know, because in English you can't tell which Greek word it is, so we have to look at the Greek. So when it's in green, that means it's parousia. When it's not in green, that means it's the word erchema, which is just another word for coming. It's a more common word. This word parousia is used about 24 times in the New Testament, and the word erchema is used over 600 times. So parousia is a more specific, kind of a special word. And what we're going to see is that Jesus basically answers the first question, when will the temple be destroyed? From verse 4 to verse 35. And then from verse 36, there's a shift to talk about the parousia. And also Jesus will clearly distinguish that the destruction of the temple is not the parousia. It's the end of an age, but it's not the end of the world. All right, so Jesus says to them, "See to it that no one deceives you," meaning they're going to hear all kinds of stuff about these two questions that's going to be false, whether it's intentional or unintentional. But he's saying here that many will come in my name, claiming to be the Messiah, and will deceive many. And that happened in the first century, before the destruction of the temple. Josephus actually writes a lot about these events. Many people claimed to be a Messiah that would restore the kingdom of Israel, like a political ruler. And what they got was somebody who died on the cross, so it wasn't really what they expected. And you're going to hear of wars and rumors of wars, which happened in the first century, and then a pretty big war in 70 AD. See that you are not alarmed, for those things must take place, but that is not yet the end. So your typical pastor in church is going to say, oh, there's wars and rumors of wars. It's a sign of the end times. Well, it says it's not a sign of the end times. It's the beginning of birth pains, what it says here. For nation will arise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes. There were famines, which is actually, the book of Acts talks about famines taking place in the first century. And earthquakes, there were earthquakes, which are documented in the first century, before 70 AD. But all these things are merely the beginning of birth pains. Now, this is a common phrase used in the Old Testament to talk about periods of suffering before the judgment. Then they will deliver you to tribulation. and will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. Okay, now, who is you? They will deliver you, the people he's talking to, his disciples. Most of the 12 apostles were killed, and there was a lot of tribulation, especially after Nero, the nut job, went totally crazy and started killing people left and right, especially Christians. This actually happened before 70 AD. And at that time, many will fall away and will betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and will deceive many. Again, Josephus documents these kind of things. And because lawlessness is multiplied, most people's love will grow cold. Lawlessness is, it's not necessarily just breaking the Torah of the Mosaic covenant. It's kind of a technical term. People will be full of pride and rebellion. They will not treat others with justice. In fact, it will be the opposite. People will be selfish. Most people's love will grow cold. So there's a connection here between lawlessness and lack of love, right? So lawlessness in the New Testament generally means you're not loving God and you're not loving other people, because those are the main commandments in the New Testament. God created people in the image and likeness of God. If God is love, God created human beings in his image and likeness. We're supposed to have a relationship with God based on love and a relationship with other people based on love. But if we don't do that, that is lawlessness. It's not talking about people not wearing the tassels, but the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. The end of what? People act like this was written last week or something. See, I'm trying to read this in its own context. This was written almost 2,000 years ago. The end for them is not the same as the end for us. And really what Jesus is doing is he's given a short-term prophecy about the destruction and judgment upon Jerusalem that will happen in their generation, and they will witness it, and they will know that this prophecy was true because it actually did come true. And then he gives a much longer-term prophecy about the second coming. And that's what a lot of the Old Testament prophets did. They would give a short-term prophecy about some imminent calamity, and it would happen in their lifetime, and people would say, oh, he's a real prophet, because that his prophecy actually came true. And then they would also give longer-term prophecies about distant events in the future. But they had to give short-term prophecies so that people would know that they were real prophets of God, because there's always been false prophets, whether it's the Old Testament or the New Testament. And so they had to give short-term prophecies that would come true, and then people would know, oh, this prophecy was true, this is a real prophet. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be proclaimed in the whole world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Judgment upon Jerusalem in 70 AD. And this here is not talking about us going to distant lands and spreading the gospel. The gospel was basically spread in the known world pretty much everywhere before 70 AD. That's why Paul was trying to go to Spain. That was like the last place that didn't have the gospel in the known world at that time. You know, they didn't really know about places like New Zealand or even North America. And there are references to this in the early church fathers. They basically say, oh, the gospel has been proclaimed in every nation now. Colossians 1:23, it says, the hope of the gospel which you have heard, which was proclaimed in all creation under heaven. The revelation of the mystery, which has been kept secret for long ages past, has been made known to all the Gentiles, all the ethne, leading to obedience of faith. All right, it's been made known to all the Gentiles. Now, not literally. I don't think every single non-Jewish person heard the gospel, but it was proclaimed in all the lands. And that's how he concludes the book of Romans. From verses 4 to 14, he's given a little summary of what's going to happen over the next 40 years or so. And the end is the destruction of the temple. It's not the end of the world. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. It's almost like a parable or a prophecy. We have to interpret this. What does this mean? And Daniel's prophecy came true in the 2nd century BC when Antiochus Epiphanes set up an image of Zeus in the temple. They basically desecrated the temple. They polluted the temple with an abomination, an image of a pagan god. Now, in the first century, they're going to see something similar, not exactly the same. The temple will be desecrated again when the Roman soldiers enter into the temple and start to destroy it. That's kind of like an abomination of desolation. See, Luke says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is at hand. So that helps to kind of clarify what he means. Then those who are in Judea, not just Jerusalem, but all of Judea, must flee to the mountains. So again, he's talking to people who actually live in Judea in the first century. He's talking to them. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things out that are in his house. Whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his garment. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. It's going to be hard to flee. But pray that your flight will not be in the winter. They have to flee to the mountains. They may have to live outdoors. It's going to be cold, or on the Sabbath. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, look at this proves that they were supposed to keep the Sabbath after the death and resurrection of Jesus, after the new covenant was inaugurated. It's not even talking about that. So basically what it's saying is that if you're living in a society where everything's closed on the Sabbath and you're fleeing, it may be difficult to find food and lodging. It may be difficult to survive. So it's not talking about, oh, they won't be able to flee to the mountains because that's more than a Sabbath day's journey. That's not what it's talking about. You could save a life on the Sabbath anyway, so that argument isn't even valid. It's talking about everything's going to be closed. Those who are in Judea, which includes every person in Judea, regardless if you have faith in Christ or not, you're going to have to flee to the mountains. This is not talking only to Christians here. This does not refer only to his apostles. His apostles were not pregnant. For then there will be a great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Now, actually, Josephus uses a very similar phrase. And yeah, you could say there's a bit of hyperbole. Jesus actually uses hyperbole quite often. It's a normal way of communication. I probably used it in this video. We didn't even notice it, right? And unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. And for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Now, the actual occupation lasted about 5 months. Ironically enough, like it says in the book of Revelation. Not talking about the end of the world, not talking about the second coming, talking about an actual event in history, the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem. Then if anyone says to you, behold, here is the Christ, the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe him. Okay, so what we have here is Jesus saying the destruction of the temple is not the second coming. If anyone says, here is the Messiah, there he is, do not believe him. Do not believe these false messiahs. Do not believe anyone who says the Messiah has returned. Even though it's going to feel like the end of the world, it's just the end of Jerusalem. It's the end of an age. It's the end of an era. It's the end of a political system. It's the end of this alliance between Jerusalem and Rome. Rome actually protected Jerusalem for a long time, and then they turned on each other. For false Christs, false messiahs, and false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders. Verse 5 is talking about false Christs, false messiahs. Verse 11, false prophets. So he's kind of said this already, actually, so as to deceive, if possible, even the elect. So again, Josephus talks about this happening in the first century before the destruction of Jerusalem. Behold, I have told you in advance. Therefore, if they say to you, behold, he is in the wilderness, do not go out, or behold, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe them. Jesus will not return at this time. For just as the lightning comes from the east and appears even to the west, so will the parousia of the Son of Man be. So basically he's saying the second coming, you won't miss it. You won't miss the second coming. Nobody will need to tell you about it. You're going to see it yourself. Everyone in the world will see it because that's when everything gets transformed. It's not going to happen in 70 AD. The full preterists believe that, Jesus returned and, some people say it's kind of more of a metaphorical returning or whatever, but it was a destruction of Jerusalem in judgment. But Jesus didn't actually literally physically return at that time because he's saying right here, this parousia, this is not happening at this time. Okay, do not believe them. This probably applies to us today as well. If somebody says Jesus returned already, do not believe them, because when he does return, you're going to know it. And this does apply to us today, because a lot of people say Jesus has returned already. Some people say, oh, he's living in the North Pole. Do not believe them. Anytime, if anyone says Jesus has returned, do not believe them, unless you're walking around in a new spiritual transformed body, or if you're like burning in hell or whatever. Everything changes. There will be no question. There will be no conspiracy theories about the second coming. It will be obvious to everybody that Jesus has returned when he actually does return. So if someone says Jesus has returned already, do not believe them. He's telling his apostles the same thing. And just because there's a war in Israel or whatever, some problems in the Middle East, it doesn't mean that's a sign of the second coming. Verse 29, but immediately after the tribulation of those days, which days? The destruction of the temple, those days, first century, 70 AD, immediately after the destruction and the tribulation of Jerusalem, the sun will be darkened. Now, notice this is a quote from the Old Testament. Isaiah 13:10 is the main one, but there's plenty of other apocalyptic passages just like this in the Old Testament all over the place. The sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Now, one of these passages comes from Isaiah 13, and it's the oracle concerning Babylon. So it's talking about the destruction of Babylon using the same kind of language. Destruction, day of Yahweh, the day of the Lord is near. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Pains and labor pangs will take hold of them, all right? Just like birth pains. We saw this in Matthew 24. They will writhe like a woman in labor. Their faces aflame. The day of Yahweh is coming to make the land a desolation, and he will exterminate its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash forth their light. The sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shed its light. Thus I will punish the world for its evil. I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken from its place. And it will be that Babylon will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. So again, it's talking about the destruction of Babylon, which happened after this prophecy later on the day of Pentecost. Peter quotes Joel talking about very similar things. The prophet Joel said, it shall be in the last days. So Peter's saying the last days have arrived. This is 2,000 years ago, the last days arrived. He quoted an apocalyptic passage on Pentecost. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. So this same type of prophecy was used at Pentecost. And a lot of this is talking about political powers. The lights in the sky, the sun, moon, and the stars were associated with political powers. The stars not giving their light and the stars falling from the sky. It's saying political powers will be destroyed. Empires will fall. This is an earth-shattering event. It would be like if Washington, D.C. was just totally destroyed, and the White House or New York City or whatever. It'd be like if America was destroyed. This amazing event, this earth-shattering, mind-blowing event. It's not to be taken as the stars literally falling to earth, okay? And this is prophetic language, apocalyptic language. These three verses here, 29 to 31, are talking about the destruction of the temple. It's not talking about the destruction of the entire earth at the second coming. See, that's the main difference between what I'm saying and what you've heard. Verses 29 to 31 are still talking about the destruction of the temple. This is not talking about the end of the world. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. Now this actually is a bit of a mistranslation. I'll look at that in a minute. Will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky of heaven with power and great glory. Now remember, I talked about this before. This is a direct quote from Daniel 7:13, and this means the enthronement of Jesus in heaven. Remember, Daniel was in heaven in his vision. He saw Jesus coming on the clouds of the sky, coming to heaven. And this is not parousia, by the way. Okay, so why does this chapter use the word parousia 4 times, but here it's not using the word parousia? It's because he's quoting Daniel. That's why. That's the main reason. Daniel did not use the word parousia in this passage. Daniel is in heaven in his dream vision. And behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like the Son of Man was coming. and he came up to the Ancient of Days and came near before him. He came up to heaven. So again, they're quoting the Old Testament here. This is like a set phrase that meant something to people 2,000 years ago, and it meant the Messiah would be enthroned in heaven. And it's not talking about Jesus coming to earth. Now, the King James has a better translation for this verse. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. It's actually the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. It's not the sign appearing in heaven. Okay, the sign does not appear in the sky. It's the sign of the Son of Man. It tells us where the Son of Man is. The Son of Man is in heaven. It doesn't tell us where the sign is. The Son of Man is in heaven. The sign is not in heaven. So this is a bit of a mistranslation. It says here, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. That's no. The sign of the Son of Man who is in heaven. The sign of the Son of Man is the destruction of the temple. That's the sign of the judgment and authority and power of Jesus now. Jesus is judging Jerusalem. That's the sign. That's why the tribes were mourning, because they saw the destruction of Jerusalem. And he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to another. That's talking about the apostles going out and spreading the gospel, and then all the Christians and all these things. That's talking about the church expanding throughout the earth, and apparently getting some help from the angels. Now, angels means messenger. There are actually dozens of passages in the Bible where the word angel, angelos in Greek, refers to human beings as well. And in Daniel, Jesus is surrounded by myriads and myriads of angels, and it's really kind of talking about this, Deuteronomy 34. If those of you who are banished are at the ends of the sky or the ends of heaven, from there Yahweh your God will gather you, and from there he will take you back. Yahweh your God will circumcise your heart, return and listen to the voice of Yahweh. This is all New Covenant church language. Gathering together his elect, the remnant of Israel. Not physical Israelites. Most of them were disobedient, just like the Gentiles. The elect from descendants of Jacob, but also Gentiles. He's going to gather his elect. He will gather you again from the nations. What's really happening is that the Gentiles have now become Israelites. The elect are from all nations. You don't have to be a physical Israelite to be gathered back into God's people. Quoting the Old Testament, the promises, the prophecies of the Old Testament are coming true. It's talking about the kingdom of God being established on earth. Now learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So too, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near, right at the door. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Okay, so this generation is talking about the people living in the first century, the people that Jesus is actually talking to. This phrase is used like a dozen times or so in the Gospel of Matthew, always talking about that generation from the first century. They will not pass away until the destruction of the temple, until judgment comes upon Jerusalem. And this here is just talking about, it's going to be obvious, just like when you see the fig trees change, summer's near. When you see all these things take place, that he is near. But it's not talking about the second coming. And in fact, this word here, it actually doesn't mean he. See, that's an interpretation. Translation is interpretation, whether you like it or not. Ideally, it wouldn't be, but it always is for any language. The translator must interpret the passage when they translate it, and notice it says he. The footnote says, or it. They chose he because they interpret the pronoun as meaning he is near, because the translation is interpreting this as the second coming. It doesn't say he. The Greek doesn't say he. It says it. And it is the end. When you see all these things take place, when you see the destruction of the temple, recognize that it is near, right at the door. Now, King James, again, so likewise ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near. All right, it says it in the King James. Now, I'm not a King James onlyist, but sometimes they get it right. It is near, not he is near. It, and what is it? It is the judgment upon Jerusalem that he's been talking about now for a few chapters up to this point. So most people think this whole thing is talking about the second coming, but it's not. It's talking about the destruction of the temple up until verse 35. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Again, he's saying it again. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. You can trust this prophecy. It's going to happen. Now, notice a shift. But of that day, see, it's a change of topic. So up into this verse, it's been talking about destruction of the temple. But of that day, let's address your second question. Up until verse 35, he tells them when these things will happen, which is there will be signs and events that they can see that this is going to happen, and then it's going to happen. But on that day, the sign of your coming, the parousia, and the end of the age, what about that day? Now, the end of the age is a bit tricky because it's like, what age are they talking about? The end of the age of the Mosaic covenant or the end of this age that we're in? Remember, they were in the Mosaic covenant age still, but the second question is about the parousia. And now he's going to answer the second question starting in verse 36. But of that day, your second question, no one knows when that day. And then notice he uses the word parousia right here. So it's the third time it appears in Matthew 24. The first time it appears is in their question, what's the sign of the parousia? And he says, well, there is no sign of the parousia. No one knows. There is no sign. It's quite possible there's not even any tribulation before the second coming. It's just going to happen suddenly, out of the blue. But of that day and hour, no one knows, and no one's going to know. So we have to be ready. That's, chapter 25 is all about be ready, because no one knows when it's going to happen. No one knows when the parousia is going to happen. And even the day before it happens, no one's going to know that it's going to happen the next day. And that's by design, because just think if we knew exactly when the parousia was going to be, we would just, do whatever we want to do until the very last minute, and then we'd repent at the last minute, human nature, right? For just as the days of Noah were, so the parousia of the Son of Man, which is Jesus, will be. And now this is not talking about Nephilim, the return of the Nephilim or anything like that. I've been reading the whole Gospel of Matthew in context. He's not suddenly changing the topic to the Nephilim here, all right? For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. Parousia. The main point is not that there were a bunch of hybrids coming back, which may or may not happen, but the main point Jesus is making is that they will not understand. They don't know that the world is about to be destroyed in a flood and that everyone's going to die except for 8 people. They're going to die. They're going to be taken, by the way. Then there will be 2 in the field. 1 will be taken, and 1 will be left. 2 women will be grinding grain at the mill. 1 will be taken, and 1 will be left. Well, look at this. It says, the flood came and took them away. They were taken. The rebellious sinners were taken. So who was left? The righteous were left. Noah and his family were left behind. You actually want to be left behind. You don't want to be taken. There's so many bizarre theories, unbiblical ideas out there about eschatology. You don't want to be taken. There is no rapture, right? There's no rapture. There's just a sudden return of Jesus. Then everything changes in the blink of an eye. And you want to be remaining. You don't want to be taken away and thrown into the garbage dump of Gehenna. You don't want to be thrown into hell. You want to be left behind. They took them. They were taken. The wicked people were taken. The remnant, the elect, were left. So this is not talking about the return of the Nephilim. The main point is that it's talking about the sudden destruction. Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. You won't even know it. The day it's coming, you're going to wake up in the morning having no idea that Jesus is going to return that day. So we don't know if it's going to happen in our lifetime. It could happen today. We don't know. Could happen 2,000 years from now. Could happen 1,000,000 years from now. We have no idea. For this reason, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not think he will. Not parousia, but it's talking about the same thing. This is talking about the second coming. He doesn't always have to use the word parousia. He's used it enough already, so we kind of know what he's talking about now. He's used it right here in verse 39. So we know the context is the parousia, the second coming. But if that evil slave says in his heart, my master is not coming for a long time, and begins to beat his fellow slaves and eat and drink with drunkards, this is lawlessness, by the way, lawlessness. The master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour which he does not know. He does not know. And will cut him in pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Again, he used the phrase hypocrites and weeping and gnashing of teeth when talking to the Judaizers of his day. The scribes and Pharisees were the Judaizers of his day, and today we have our Judaizers today. They think they're going in the kingdom because they're wearing tassels, but Jesus will say, I don't even know you guys, man. You guys are still practicing ritual purity laws when I've actually cleansed people's hearts. You cannot be defiled by what goes in your mouth. And this continues into all of chapter 25. It's basically just be ready, be ready, be ready. Stay awake. You do not know the day or the hour. So it almost seems to me that if we think the second coming is going to happen, that's almost guarantees that it's not going to happen because we don't know. After a long time, Jesus will not come for a long time. Now, maybe 2,000 years is a long time. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them from one another as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. So in summary, the disciples asked him two questions. When will these things happen? The destruction of the temple in judgment, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? They don't really ask the right questions. So Jesus kind of sets them straight and answers the first question from verses 4 to 35, talking about the destruction of the temple. And then he talks about the parousia after verse 36. So all this stuff here took place before and including 70 AD. Even this apocalyptic language here is used to describe the earth-shattering events of the destruction of Jerusalem. Like the world changed, and especially the way God interacts with people. That was the judgment. But now judgment upon the old era had to happen in 70 AD. And the Jews were kind of given like 40 years to recognize and bend the knee to their Messiah. But those who did not, which were most of them, they were judged. It was like Sodom and Gomorrah. And then, verse 36, there needs to be a heading right here. But of that day, there should be a heading that says, second coming or parousia. Put it right here. Transition. This is a transition. No one knows. See, he talked about all these signs and things that would happen with the destruction of the temple, but of the parousia, which is right here, parousia, nobody knows when that's going to happen. So the destruction of the temple had all kinds of signs and things happening around it, but of that day, nobody knows that. And so it totally changes after verse 36. Tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed. So that's what Matthew 24:36 and onwards throughout Matthew 25 is talking about. We will all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, when we least expect it. We will not know when this is going to happen, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we will be changed. It's going to happen suddenly. No pre-tribulation or rapture, none of that stuff. It's just very simple. Jesus will just return someday, suddenly. For this corruptible must put on the incorruptible, and this mortal must put on immortality. And even if you look at Revelation, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his slaves, his servants, the things which must soon happen. So I also believe that most of Revelation is about the judgment upon Jerusalem. It must soon happen. I believe Revelation was written before 70 AD. The time is near. So they're not talking about something that's going to happen 2,000 or thousands of years later. It must soon happen. The time is near. And he's writing to 7 specific churches. And Revelation 6 also talking about sun, moon, stars, earthquakes, stars falling from the sky, talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, using apocalyptic and symbolic language because these luminaries in the sky represented political power. The luminaries were called rulers, actually, and they could even represent the Elohim who are ruling over the nations. These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation, and they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their witness, and they did not love their life even to death. They were martyred. Around 64 AD, just like Jesus said in Matthew 24, you will be killed for my name. Torment for 5 months. That's how long the occupation of Jerusalem lasted. And when they have finished their witness, the beast that comes up from the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them, and their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, Jerusalem, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where their Lord was crucified. Where was the Lord crucified? Jerusalem. Why is Jerusalem called Sodom and Egypt? The judgment of the great harlot, who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed sexual immorality, a woman sitting on a scarlet beast. Who is the great harlot? It's Jerusalem. Jerusalem had an alliance with Rome. Rome protected Jerusalem. The woman, Jerusalem, the whore, sat on the scarlet beast, who is Rome. The woman is Jerusalem. The scarlet beast is Rome. And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of abominations of the earth. The word harlot is used for Jerusalem because they were once in covenant, which is like a marriage. They were once in covenant with God. They were an adulterous wife, so they're called a harlot. Now, Rome was never really in covenant with God, so they're not called a harlot. They're just Rome. They're just Gentiles. They were never in a special relationship with God. Babylon the Great here is actually Jerusalem. Jerusalem was judged just like all these other wicked nations. They were full of pride and rebellion. They rejected, they killed Jesus, all right? They killed their own Messiah. Then I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints. Jerusalem killed the prophets. This is just like Matthew 23. And they killed Jesus, and they killed the apostles. They killed the disciples of Jesus. Fallen is Babylon. Babylon is Jerusalem. This is the destruction of Jerusalem right here. Chapter 18. Woe, woe, the great city, Babylon, which is Jerusalem, 70 AD. For in 1 hour your judgment has come. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, who they killed. Jerusalem killed the apostles and the prophets because God has pronounced judgment for you against her. All the nations were deceived by your pharmakia, and in her was found the blood of the prophets and of saints and of all who have been slain on the earth. Very similar to right here. You will kill and crucify the prophets. Jerusalem had the guilt of the blood of the righteous. They were murdered. Judgment will come upon this generation. 70 AD. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets. Behold, your house is being left to you desolate. So in Matthew 24, Jesus is basically given this prophecy that Jerusalem will be destroyed. And then he also gives the prophecy to John in the book of Revelation in great detail, even more cryptic language, but it's all about what's about to happen to Jerusalem, the judgment of the whore of Babylon, which is Jerusalem. Now, why is it so cryptic and hard to understand? Well, that's just kind of how prophecy works, just like the parables of Jesus were just like that. He revealed the true meaning of the parables only to his disciples, and they still had trouble understanding it. So I think you kind of need to have the Holy Spirit to understand prophecy and how prophecy is fulfilled. It's very unique, very different than normal language. But remember, when there's apocalyptic language, especially like what we see in 29 to 31, that's very difficult to understand. But we have to look carefully at the Old Testament quotations. And in this Bible, I'm using the Legacy Standard Bible. It has the Old Testament quotes in all caps. You can see there's quite a few quotations from the Old Testament happening here that need to be interpreted in context. So if you want to read more about this approach to Matthew 24, there's a commentary by R.T. France who explains a lot of this in detail in his book. Now, another question would be, is the destruction of the temple kind of a typology, just like Sodom and Gomorrah is kind of a typology of the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD? Is that a typology of the end of this age that we're in? Is that a typology of the destruction of the world before the second coming? Well, maybe. That's kind of what we're conditioned to believe, but it does say of that day no one knows. So like if there was all this tribulation happening, wouldn't we kind of know like, oh, this is the end times? But it seems like it's just going to happen suddenly, just like the flood. There were no signs before the flood. It wasn't like people are like, oh man, I think the flood's about to happen. We better build a boat. Nobody knew it was coming. Now this interpretation of Matthew 24 may change my views of eschatology a bit. Thanks for watching.